Millions gather every November, believing Thanksgiving began with a simple feast of harmony in 1621. The official story celebrates shared tables and gratitude, but beneath it lies a forgotten crisis. Up to 90% of local indigenous people lost to epidemics, alliances forged under threat, and a history rewritten by myth. Why does America cling to a legend so far from the truth and whose voices have been left out? The real story is more complicated than you have ever heard. William Bradford, governor of Plymouth Colony, recorded the earliest surviving account of the 1621 harvest gathering. In his manuscript, he described how the settlers, after their first successful crop, decided to gather the fruit of our labors. Bradford wrote that they began now to gather in the small harvest they had and to fit up their houses and dwellings against winter, being all well recovered in health and strength and had all things in good plenty. The event was not called a Thanksgiving by Bradford or his peers. For them, a true day of Thanksgiving was a solemn, prayerful occasion, not a feast. What Bradford described was a communal meal shared with their Wampanoag neighbors following weeks of hard work in the fields. The gathering lasted several days. Bradford noted the presence of Massasoit, the Wampanoag leader, and about 90 of his men. The menu reflected what was available: wildfowl, corn from the recent harvest, and venison brought by the Wampanoag. There is no mention of turkey, cranberry sauce, or pumpkin pie. The meal was practical, shaped by necessity and the land's offerings, not by tradition or ceremony. Bradford's account reveals a local event born out of relief and survival, not national intent or myth-making. The manuscript's plain language and lack of religious framing remind us that the story began as a record of a single, uncertain autumn, not as the origin of a holiday for a nation. The legend, as it would later be told, grew far beyond the boundaries of Bradford's simple harvest record. Long before any English ship crossed the horizon, the Wampanoag people gathered each autumn to give thanks. These ceremonies, held on the land they called home for thousands of years, honored the harvest, the changing seasons, and the web of kinship that sustained their villages. Food was shared, songs and stories carried memory across generations, and gratitude was woven into the rhythm of life. Elders recall how these feasts marked not just survival, but the renewal of bonds between families and with the land itself. The world changed swiftly after 1616. Disease swept through Wampanoag villages, brought by traders and settlers from across the Atlantic. Within 3 years, up to 9 out of every 10 people in some communities died. Entire villages like Patuxet stood silent, their fields overgrown, their families gone. The land where the English later built Plymouth was once a thriving Wampanoag town, emptied by grief few outsiders could imagine. In this landscape of loss, Massasoit, Usamaquin to his people, faced decisions no leader should bear alone. With the Wampanoag weakened and rival nations pressing in, he weighed the risks and possibilities of alliance with the newcomers. Oral histories describe this partnership not as simple friendship, but as a calculation for survival, a way to protect the remnants of his nation from further devastation. When the English and Wampanoag shared food in 1621, it was a moment shaped by necessity, diplomacy, and the memory of all that had been lost. Today, Wampanoag elders remind us that their generosity made the harvest possible, but the cost was immeasurable, and the story of Thanksgiving is incomplete without their voice. Sarah Josepha Hale believed that a single day of thanks could help knit a fractured nation together. As editor of Godey's Ladies Book, she reached into thousands of American homes each month, filling its pages with stories, recipes, and calls for unity. Starting in 1827, Hale began a campaign that would last 36 years. Every autumn, she published editorials urging governors and presidents to proclaim a national Thanksgiving. Her letters piled up on the desks of 5 presidents, from Zachary Taylor to Abraham Lincoln, each one making the case for a shared ritual that would transcend regional and religious divides. In her magazine, Hale painted Thanksgiving as a celebration of home and family, complete with turkey, stuffing, and pumpkin pie. She invited readers to imagine their own tables joined with millions of others across the country. Through her words, Thanksgiving began to feel less like a New England custom and more like a promise of national belonging. By the late 1800s, Thanksgiving had begun to take on a new sensory identity. Turkey, once just one of many possible main courses, found its place at the center of the holiday table. Culinary historians point to the bird's native status, its size, large enough to feed a gathering, and the influence of popular magazines like Godey's Lady's Book, where editors and cookbook writers called for roasted turkey as the proper centerpiece. As railroads and cold storage expanded, turkeys became easier to find, and recipes traveled from city to city. In 1924, Macy's launched its first Thanksgiving Day parade in New York, a spectacle of floats, bands, and giant balloons that drew crowds into the streets and, eventually, to department store counters. The parade's broadcast reach soon meant that families across the country could share the same excitement each Thanksgiving morning. Then, in 1934, the Detroit Lions hosted their first Thanksgiving football game, a tradition that would grow alongside the holiday itself. By the mid-20th century, turkey, parade, and football had become the sensory glue binding millions of Americans to a shared ritual, no matter where they gathered. In 1939, President Franklin D. Roosevelt startled the country by announcing that Thanksgiving would move up a week. The reason wasn't gratitude or tradition, it was retail. With the Great Depression still dragging on, store owners pleaded for more time between Thanksgiving and Christmas to boost holiday sales. Roosevelt's proclamation split the country in two. Some states followed the president's new date, while others stuck to the old one, leading to years when neighbors, schools, and even football leagues could not agree on when to celebrate. Newspapers called it Franksgiving, and the confusion only deepened the debate over who truly owned the holiday, families or retailers. By 1941, Congress stepped in, passing a law that fixed Thanksgiving on the fourth Thursday of November. The move satisfied business interests and helped lock in the start of the holiday shopping season, but it left a lingering question. Was Thanksgiving about coming together or about getting ahead? The answer, it seemed, depended on which side of the shop window you stood. On Plymouth's 350th anniversary, a banquet was planned to honor the so-called Pilgrim legacy. Frank James, a respected Wampanoag educator and leader, was invited to speak. When organizers read his prepared remarks, they rescinded the invitation. James's speech did not celebrate the Pilgrims. Instead, it laid bare the centuries of broken promises, stolen land, and erased histories that followed their arrival. He wrote, "History wants us to believe that the Pilgrims came here seeking freedom of a new life. Yet what they found was a new world already inhabited by people who had their own culture, their own government, their own ways." The banquet went on without him, but James refused silence. That November, he gathered with supporters at Plymouth Rock, reading his speech aloud to the wind and the stones. His words, once censored, became a rallying cry. The rupture could not be smoothed over with ceremony. From that day forward, Thanksgiving in Plymouth carried a new meaning, one that included protest, remembrance, and the demand to be heard. Each year on Thanksgiving, a different gathering unfolds in Plymouth. Members of the United American Indians of New England and their allies assemble at Coles Hill, overlooking the harbor, for the National Day of Mourning. The first of these gatherings took place in 1970, led by Wamsuta Frank James after his voice was silenced at the Pilgrim Anniversary Banquet. What began as a protest has become a yearly ritual, part remembrance, part resistance. Drums sound, prayers are offered, and speakers from indigenous nations across the continent share stories of survival, struggle, and hope. The crowd stands in the cold November air, listening as United American Indians of New England activists recall lost ancestors, demand justice for broken treaties, and challenge the myths woven into the holiday. For over 50 years, this assembly has insisted that Thanksgiving is not just a day of gratitude, but a time to reckon with history. The National Day of Mourning endures not as a footnote, but as a living reminder that the story of Thanksgiving is unfinished, and that the voices once pushed aside still rise each November, determined to be heard. Thanksgiving's meaning is still debated, on dinner tables and in public memory. As more Americans confront the holiday's origins, the story keeps shifting. Who we include in that story shapes the nation we build next. The table is set. The conversation is not over. Share your thoughts below.